Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next edition of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead here at Sports Pro Media. It's been about 6 months since I've said that, so I'm mostly happy that I didn't use our old podcast name or make any other mistakes. Before I introduce, as always, our CEO, just wanted to quickly sort of address, like I mentioned, it's been about 6 months since I've been here, and some people might say it's a bit vain to have to explain yourself to your niche podcast audience, but myself, my family have been going through some things on a personal level and just needed some time to step back and, support each other and kind of get myself back on track. And selfishly, the reason I say this is more for myself, because I don't want to pretend like what happened didn't happen. I do appreciate the people that have reached out to me, in my absence. And I'll say it was really flattering to people that were in New York or Sports Pro Live asking the team about where I'm at. Consider this podcast sort of my step back into sort of that world. Look forward to seeing everybody, and very much looking forward to being back on the podcast. So, everyone's aware that you're in Jamaica, but I'm actually headed to the Dominican Republic next week for a nice 10-day holiday with my wife. It's been so long since we've worked together, Nick. I felt like I had to come as close as possible as I could just to be in your aura.
It's so funny, actually. Since I have been over here, so many people I know have been in and around Jamaica, like out of the Bahamas here, the Barbados here, Dominican Republic. It seems like Caribbean's becoming a real hot spot for people who are trying to get some sun, particularly over the last 6 months, where Europe and the UK has been a little bit worse for wear when it comes to the weather. So it seems to be you're a hop, skip, and a jump away from me. I reckon you're less than like 200. You'll be less than 200 kilometers away from me, probably, or 300 kilometers away. Yet across a very big sea that not that I'm not familiar with too many people. I don't even know if you can get a boat across from there to here. I know you can get a boat from the northern part of the island to Cuba, but then you might not get back. Or definitely you won't be allowed into the US if they hear about it. That's for sure.
Well, one of the interesting things, Nick, I'm going to have to figure out is what the coverage is going to be like of the Euros, because one of the things I'm excited about is the day after we land, the Euros kicks off. So my intention is to have European champion football from about 9 a.m. local time till about 3 p.m. local time every day, which I think is just going to work perfectly for the beach bar, wake up early, get a little breakfast, just day drink, perfect time to take a little nap before you go out for dinner. So I'm going to have to figure out who has the local broadcast rights for the Euros in the Dominican Republic, a very niche topic that fits perfectly into our podcast.
Well, it does indeed. And just out of interest, which team would you follow? Were you going to follow a specific team, or are you just going to be a supporter of great football?
In perfect fashion with sports media, I'm a heavy SoRare user for anyone that's interested in the Web3 collectible space. So I'll be rooting for whichever players my SoRare team have. So I've got a bit of a strong relationship with England and Germany. If those two teams do well, then my SoRare team should do well. So yeah, we're going to follow the money.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I do think you're quite a modern day sports fan these days, where you do follow players and the fantasy aspects of sport these days. But yeah, it is interesting. Like at some stage, I would love to do actually a bit of a podcast on the dynamics of the Caribbean market, because it's really interesting talking to some people here about how they watch and consume sports. They're wondering why I'm grilling them without them knowing why I'm grilling them, because actually things like, for example, the Premier League and the Euros and the CONCACAF. All of those events that are happening, well, some of them are available on free to air, some of them are available on cable, and some of them aren't even barely available. Like the Premier League, people were having to be forced to pirate the content because it was not available on any other channel. Like it wasn't actually being made available because there was some fallout or issues with some of the existing carriage partners out here. So it's something I want to spend a bit more time into. I want to talk to a few more people to get a bit of a sense of how that's all played out. I've already talked to the CEO of one of the major broadcasters out here to get a sense of their angle on it all. But look, hopefully you'll be able to I'm sure you'll get plenty of people joining you, watching some of the Euro action, although you're probably going to have a lot more Americans there. So also the NBA finals will be on, right? So,
and in a time zone that I can actually watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing now. I watch so much more American sports because I get ESPN Caribbean, which I don't know how much that differs from the normal channel. I'm guessing it quite a bit, but now I've ended up watching every other night. I'm watching the NHL or the NBA when it's on there. Although I would have to say that it's sometimes just in the background while I'm faffing about on my phone or doing some work. So yeah, it definitely makes a big difference having the US sports on the time zone if that's your thing.
I totally forgot about the NBA Finals. I'm very much looking forward to that because that should be, game 3, 4, 5, like right in the midst of it. So yeah, that's a great shout, Nick.
Well, I'm quite excited about it too, and obviously you have the underlying story still hanging around about what's actually going to happen with the NBA and its rights over the next cycle. So it'll be interesting to see that goes quiet as we get through this, or whether it becomes even more talked about and more speculated about through the finals. But I have to ask you, who's your pick for the winner? Is it the Celtics or is it the Mavericks?
You asked me with my head or my heart.
I'm asking, well, give us both.
I mean, head says you got to go with the Celtics. I mean, they're putting up some very statistically unprecedented numbers in terms of offensive efficiency, two bona fide stars between Brown and the Duke graduate. How am I forgetting his name
Tatum?
already? Jason Tatum. Yes, thank you. But my heart, I just want to go with Luka. I love watching these European dudes between Joker and Luka and Giannis. Like, I just love what they're bringing to the game. So, and they still got Kyrie, so another Duke guy. I'm a Duke basketball fan, so I think it'd be really cool to see Kyrie go back to Boston and win.
Definitely would be. I think, well, I do really like watching Luka, mainly him and Jokic, because they're slower white dudes like me who basically aren't very athletic, but are able to absolutely dominate one of the most athletic sports going around. So I love the conundrum that sort of serves people after thinking that for many years that you could only be successful in the NBA if you were an absolute specimen of an athlete.
Well, now in a way that I think I have an unprecedented skill, Nick, I'm going to find a way to segue. And, we're talking about media rights deals and media rights deals that perhaps went a little bit quiet, perhaps. And one of the things that's really interesting that we're going to start the show off with is the Ligue 1 rights and, France's equivalent to the Premier League. We had Ben Morel speak at Sports from Madrid back in late November, early December, and we were having conversations because there were some difficulties around selling their media rights. And we're now into early June, and that conversation is still going on about what the future of their media rights looks like. And there's still some conversation potentially about would they launch their own D2C platform if they didn't get the rights they were looking for from a broadcast partner. So, given, Nick, this is something that is not a news story, but seemingly continues to have more and more drama around it, should they be concerned that this story is still going on so long and that news keeps getting brought up, but no progress has seemingly been made?
Yeah, they should be really concerned with how this is all playing out. I think we've seen a fundamental shift in the way, and it's been well documented, but we've covered it a lot, that the media rights landscape for live sports has fundamentally shifted, particularly outside of the US, and all of football in particular, which has been built so heavily on those highly touted media rights deals that have been funding the industry for so long, are flattening and decreasing. And what it looks like is that France is in a situation now where they're going to be hit the hardest we've seen in decades with regards to the downward pressure that they're going to be seeing. I mean, DAZN is probably the leading contender in that market at the moment. They've been making some moves around women's football, including buying the women's league there. But there is fundamentally less competition and less willingness from any of the major streamers and any of the major traditional incumbents to spend heavily on live sports rights any longer. So the question does remain: Does the LFP have to go it alone, or at least launch a direct-to-consumer offering, an OTT service to broadcast some of their games? I think they will have to do something around that ilk. I don't think you're going to see anyone looking to buy up all the rights unless they get it at a discount. Amazon never does. They always buy bits and pieces of the pie. They make strategic moves and little bets to see how that'll go. Maybe what might happen is that Canal Plus comes back to the table with a new deal, which will at least give the LFP the most exposure possible, given Canal Plus's prominence. But at the moment, they've been pretty forthright about not being up for those rights, and that's really, I think, what's really set all this off is that LFP doesn't have one of the main traditional players in the market in the fight for those rights like they used to. So I think it's a really fascinating to see how bad it gets, and whether if Ligue do have to launch their own platform. I think that's not going to be by choice. It's going to be kind of like their hand will be forced. The net benefit is that maybe they can start building a direct consumer relationship with some customers, and maybe use some of those rights that wouldn't be used otherwise to start building something more substantial. but it's not looking pretty for the LFP. And it comes at a time where they've lost all these major pros. You think about Neymar, Messi, Ronaldo all leaving the league. Mbappe's left the league. Yeah, it's not a good time for the LFP yet. I still think it's almost reaching its bottom. And now I do think once it gets through this cycle, then I do think you'll see some growth in it because the French market is so solid when it comes to the football. But yeah, not a good time for them, that's for sure.
It's not a good time for them, but do you think perhaps other European football leagues are very excited to see what comes of this? Not because they want to see a competitor fail, because ultimately it's a rising tide, right? If it happens to France, it could happen anywhere. But do you think they're interested to see, could they pull off a direct-to-consumer? Because I think, everyone in the UK has talked about why doesn't the Premier League go D2C, and we've covered quite comprehensively why that's not as easy as it is. But do you think they're excited to see what potentially happens, to see if there is a roadmap to roll something out like this?
Yeah, for sure. I think whenever you can have someone else be the guinea pig for you to work out if something that you're too afraid of taking a risk or a bet on is going to work, then this is the best way to see it happen. And the Western European markets are very like for like in that nature around consumption behavior, around the value of those rights. So I'm sure they'd be very excited to see them go through it. I think they would be very, very reluctant to do it if they had to. But I think there's also going to be, on the excitement part, to see them go through that journey. I think there'll be still a bit of a fear of, what happens if this happens to us in the next cycle or the cycle after that? And it could really happen. Like if you think about Italy or think about in Germany, well, if it wasn't for DAZN being at the table, there would be a serious lack of competitive tension in those markets for rights. And would they be dropping even further if they weren't at the bargaining table? So, excited to follow what they do on the OTT side if they do launch and see how successful it is. But I think it definitely wouldn't be the ideal scenario for anyone at this stage until there's a much more mature adoption of streaming services in Europe, where Europe has been really just so slow to adopt streaming services when you compare it to what's happened in the US over the last couple of years.
Well, moving from one sports league that seemingly struggled to find any deal, we're going to move to a league that seemingly cannot stop signing more deals with the NFL and their recent, small package of games with Netflix. And again, this is really interesting because it wasn't too long ago in London at Sports Pro Live, yourself, Steve McCaskill, Lydia Fairfax, kind of talking about big tech's role. And, for years, we've always talked about Netflix, and you yourself have sort of said it doesn't necessarily make sense for Netflix to necessarily move into live sports with their proposition, assuming, they didn't do something where they're buying multiple packages and multiple games. Well, here we are. They've gone and done it, and they've done it with arguably the biggest sports league in the world. So, I think there's some people I've seen that are a bit upset because they're like, great, this is one more subscription I have to pay for. On the other side, think of it is, I don't know many people that aren't already subscribed to Amazon Prime and already subscribed to Netflix. Like, I get it on the surface when people have these tweets saying, oh, it's now going to cost you X amount of dollars to watch every NFL game. I'd be curious to know what the stat is on how much extra money are you going to pay because you weren't already subscribing. I don't know what the differences are in those numbers, but one more new broadcast partner for the NFL, and interestingly, it's Netflix.
It's the perfect type of deal for them. I don't know how the NFL have done it. I remember 5+ years ago, whenever the latest cycle was announced, and there was this $110 billion price tag attached to all their media rights. And really, I think we just all assumed and did look into the finer details to realize how much was still left on the table, how much was available for them to do these strategic deals with, and apparently quite a lot. They've done deals on the betting side through Genius and BetMGM. They've done these other Black Friday deals with Amazon, and now this one around Christmas Day. So I'm excited definitely to see where Netflix goes with this now. The reasons I always had concerns about the thought and notion that Netflix would come to the table was for a couple of simple reasons. One was their churn rates are already the lowest in the industry. So they're not losing subscribers. So the retention side of things isn't a problem for them. And that's where you could consider that live sports can aid the building extra value there. And the other is they've really hit a pretty solid market cap in terms of like the maturity of the subscriber base they have, particularly in markets like the US. So do they need to really invest heavily in driving further customer acquisition? And that was always where I got stuck on, is like, what would be the business benefit? But now, particularly with the success of launching their ad tier, well, what do we know that the NFL and some other sports are really good for? Well, it's appointment viewing and it's advertising sales and revenue. So they can drive a whole host of supplementary revenue through advertising that they wouldn't be able to do through the subscription only products. And it just fits into the nature of the feed and experience without compromising it, because there's people that are so used to consuming NFL and with advertising being at the heart and soul of the broadcast. So advertising becomes a huge revenue generator all of a sudden for Netflix. It was already becoming part of the mix in that hybrid subscription model, the ad funded ad tier model. Now it becomes even a huge new revenue stream for them, and they're able to give any of these major broadcasters instant scalability because they have a greater reach than any other broadcast partner out there. So I still think they didn't. It's not a move they needed to make. I think it's partially, hey, there's new opportunities here to grow. It also hurts our competitors by taking away some rights that we know can help drive audiences to them. So I think it's a very bold move, a bullish move, but I can definitely see why they're making that move now, given the success of the advertising business.
It will be interesting. Like you said, this is not something that they're great at streaming, but streaming live sports is a completely different monster. So it will be interesting to understand from the NFL's perspective what they saw to think that they could have the confidence that they could pull this off, because it is something. It's Christmas Day. There's going to be a lot of people around. Like, there could be nothing worse than this not being successful. And Netflix doesn't have a long list of case studies to say they can do. So I think the first time they did it was one of the Real Housewives shows. I don't think it was Real Housewives, but it was something along those lines. And I remember it didn't go too
rumor tells
well.
me it was Love Is Blind, I believe. Rumor tells me.
That is it. Yeah, there you go.
I know that's to be I don't know if that's to be the case, Chris. Don't ask me any further questions about why I know that.
Well, I knew it was something bad, not as great as Married at First Sight Australia, which I don't know if you indulge in as an Australian. It's a great show. But I remember that didn't go too well. So again, it's just, from the NFL's perspective, I mean, they're the Kings. If it doesn't work, it probably doesn't. But it does seem like a very big way to announce yourself as Netflix if it doesn't go right.
Well, look, we have been following their moves in the live sports and entertainment game for some time. They've obviously done the new WWE deal, which kicks off in 2025. So this is probably another one of those stepping stones for them to. It's a relatively small bet for them, in terms of the amount of money they spend, the billions they spend on licensing content, 150 million a game to try and see if they can generate significant impact, whether it be audience retention, new subscribers, or whatever it might be as their major metrics of success. It's a relatively easy move for them to make to see if they can move the needle there. And they have been doing lots of live broadcasting of different nature. You've got the what was the name of that exhibition match between Alcaraz and Nadal? They've done various other golfing exhibition stuff as well on there. So they've done some bits and pieces here. This is obviously a whole other ball game. But you got to remember, I haven't seen the numbers. This is obviously servicing the US. I believe there is an international component, right? I think it is a global deal, which I think that part is the most interesting here, that it's going to be available through international channels as well, to see if they were able to really drive attention to the NFL from people who aren't necessarily fans of the NFL in non-key markets. So, yeah, very interested to see how they do here. I really, really want it to be successful, because it means that Netflix could just be at the beginning point of investing into sports, particularly if it has a really solid ad offering in the mix as well.
Yep, definitely need more competitors, as we talked about with Ligue. They might look for Netflix to do it one day. More competition is always beneficial. But one country that maybe competition is seemingly being brought in more and more under one umbrella is Sky Sports. Now, we know that Sky Sports has done some recent deals, re-upping some of the different things they've done with the Premier League, also what they're doing in the future for the EFL, the English Football League. And I even going backwards, part of those deals also was increased games on TV, which I know you've talked about, where, they'll talk about the money's gone up, but when you actually look at it on a per game basis, it's actually stagnated or potentially even gone down a little bit. But in that time, they've also announced the launch of a new platform, Sky Sports Plus. Now, that seems to be the easiest thing in the world, Nick, for a streaming platform, is just to put plus on the end of it and let it go. But why is Sky Sports Plus, different from all the other different packages that sit within the Sky Sports sort of ecosystem that people should be paying attention to?
Well, really, it's a game changer for a couple of reasons. For those that aren't familiar with Sky Sports, I mean, I have never actually owned a Sky Sports subscription. I hope I don't disappoint some of the Sky Sports executives over there, but I have watched Sky Sports enough and I've followed them enough to know a little bit about their business. But one of the big things they started evolving to in the last cycle, particularly when I spoke to the managing director, Jonathan Lichter, in I think season one of the StreamTime Sports, or year one of the StreamTime Sports podcast, was about how they had to shift from a very traditional, here's Sky Sports 1, Sky Sports 2, Sky Sports 3, linear channels, and then maybe a main event pay-per-view channel. And that was kind of it. And they shifted that to a single sports focused offering of like Sky Sports Golf, Sky Sports Formula One, Sky Sports Cricket. And they still had a couple of linear channels as well on top of that. So what that led them to do was they could be much more focused on where they were spending their money on media rights by spending more on those single sports properties that they know that there's pent up audiences and fan bases. So, hey, if you're a golf fan, if you're a F1 fan, a fight sports fan, you have to have a subscription to Sky Sports because that is where the majority of the content is in the UK. But the knock-on effect of that is it stopped basically them bidding for those tier 2, tier 3 rights that wouldn't fit didn't have a place to go, basically. Didn't have a place to go in those single channels and didn't have a place to go in their traditional linear channels on the cable product they were offering. So now what Sky Sports Plus does, I think the line is they will allow something like 30 unique live events being streamed at any one time. It will allow them to just basically have way more live sports available, way more. And so what the knock-on effect here is that they're going to be able to now provide a platform for those tier 2, tier 3 sports that just didn't have the space for them to be visible on. They'll now be available in the Sky Sports Plus product if they want to. So you could think about some of those tier 2, tier 3 challenger sports that have historically sort of been lost and maybe have had to go OTT, have had to go social media, have had to maybe take smaller deals with some of the free-to-air channels like BBC or ITV or Channel 4. Now they can say, hey, well, we can house all of your content all year round. You can be available and visible on Sky Sports Plus, and you'll have access to a much, much bigger audience. So what I think the net effect here is that they're not necessarily going to start bidding for loads more rights and paying premiums and paying more rights. They're going to be saying to the sports property, say, hey, we've got a platform here. We've got a ready-made audience. Give us your stuff and we can make it available to a ready-made sports fan base that is already consuming heavily around sports and do it at a pretty cheap price. So I really like the move for Sky Sports. It gives them another chance to just up the game again and come back into the space of having a lot more sports available in Sky Sports again and not just being focused around a few of those key properties that they have been for the last 5+ years. So another great move for them to keep maintaining their dominance in this market.
How apples to apples would you say that is to ESPN Plus? You know, you think about ESPN Plus, ESPN will still have the SEC and the NBA and some of their big things on the linear channels, but then they've got hundreds of ESPN Plus channels that all of a sudden is showing Division II baseball that no one else is going to watch or see elsewhere. You know, do you see them as being relatively similar moves, at least from a strategic perspective?
I'd say I haven't used ESPN Plus for some time, but I would say similar. I'd say the difference here is in the short term, I can't see Sky Sports going crazy and like getting lots of like real lower tier niche stuff that is not of interest to people initially. But maybe if they start to see it really working well, then they might be in a position where like, hey, let's just open up the floodgates here. Let's make sure we've got the NCAA volleyball and some sort of the Thai football league available on the platform. We just basically just go nuts of picking up stuff from all over the world and making it available in this platform. But for now, I think they'll just be strategic. They just make sure they're going to prioritize football. Obviously, they're going to prioritize these new deals they've done with the EFL and make sure they are all available, make sure they work well, because that is the biggest product servicing their core audience by some means. You're talking what was 1,000 matches a season available now, right? Like it's and that package services the entire country. So they want to make sure that works really well. And they've obviously got tennis and other products there as well that I think they'll just keep building, inching, and adding to it as they go along. The question will be: will they be up for putting any money on the table with extra media rights? I doubt it, because they've been very tough negotiators in the last few cycles for even those top tier rights.
Well, I suppose speaking about ESPN, another nice, easy, natural segue is talking about what I'm hoping is pronounced as Venu Sports. If that's not what it's going to be called, someone can let me know. But we have talked a little bit about this in the past, and I think it's something we've wanted to talk about, but recent episodes just haven't had a chance to just sit down and talk about the news, given some of the guests that we've had in different events that we've been hosting. But there was all the talk, sort of at the end of 2023. Some of that coming from, our friend David Gandler at Fubo talking about sort of legally this idea of, Disney and Fox and Warner Brothers coming together would be a monopoly. And it's sort of continued to progress. But it does seem like as the time goes, we're starting to get more and more details about the specifics. There's still some questions around the pricing, but there's some rough estimates. But there's also talk around what those specific pack or sports packages will be within there. So, Nick, just because we've not necessarily had a chance to sit down and talk about Venu Sports, maybe just what are your thoughts from what you've seen, how it's progressing, what hurdles may still exist, or just some of your key thoughts on it?
Yeah, the name is an interesting one. I always have flashbacks when you see names like this, which yeah, I thought it was Venu, which could be is came in French. No, that won't work. Venue, okay, venue for sport makes sense. Not having the E there looks more like Venus than venue to me, but whatever. I'm sure they pay lots of brand agencies millions and millions of dollars to work out that that's the name to go with. Still, nothing will outdo DAZN's name and brand, which still gets me today to see that DAZN together and pronounced as it is. But anyway, I digress. I look as a fan, as a consumer, as someone who loves watching sports. I think the idea of having this real nice mix of a lot of linear style channels available, all your sports just packaged up into one concentrated product and not forcing me to buy access to dozens and dozens and dozens of channels that I will just never use and I just have to navigate across them to find what I want to watch makes complete sense. Like, sign me up. It's a much more. I'm really being laser focused on getting a product that I want. And 55% of the US sports rights is definitely significant in this product. If you think that all those rights will be there, you're still going to need 3 or 4 other subscriptions to get access to the other products. But we're already seeing hints of other potential aggregation deals happening and being discussed with some of their competitors, whether it be Apple and Peacock and others talking about doing different types of aggregation deals. So I think we're now at the starting point. We're going to see more of this aggregated type relationship, not to the extent of the Venu Sports deal, but still you're going to see more and more of them to make it easier for consumers to make a decision on where they want to park their cash. And as they're seeing such a drop-off in cable subscriptions across the US. I think what's going to be really interesting is if Warner Brothers Discovery really do lose, and we covered this a little bit in the conversation I did with Steve and Lydia on Streaming Wars, which you should listen to. It's a couple of weeks ago. Really good episode, and particularly when I'm talking to experts like them, it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about, or not what I'm talking about sometimes. But the point was, if Warner Brothers Discovery do lose those rights to the NBA, which was their crown jewel on the sports front, just what's the knock-on effect here? Will they be able to keep their cable and carriage deals they've got in place at the level that they were? They're going to have to find a substitute somehow, some way. Now, the rumors are, the speculation is that they could still end up with some NBA rights. They're not out of the picture yet, and they still could end up with something. But if they do, let's play the hypothetical game, then this deal, they're not really bringing nearly as much to the table as Fox or ESPN are in the same ilk. So that needs to be more about the type of deal that they have in place and how that will be managed. As far as I was aware, it was a share of probably revenue and maybe a share of profits. But yeah, I don't know enough about that deal. We're going to learn a lot more as it comes to light with the regulatory and legal challenges we're seeing with Fubo and alike. Where no doubt more of that deal and more of that relationship will become clear. So I like anything that aggregates sports content together. I can see this being a real winner for people in the US who just know they like sport and that's what they want. I would love this sort of thing to be available internationally. As selfishly, sitting here in the Caribbean, I basically just watch ESPN most of the time, a bit of Sports Max, which is the Digicel channel, but they serve all sorts of random stuff like the Trinidad and Tobago Premier League, which is not quite of the same status as the EPL. So I'd like to have access to something like this just so I can have the breadth of content access that I would like. So yeah, look, like the product, it's that we don't even go down the Fubo line, which we had obviously David on the pod about a month or two ago about covering some of the challenges that they see and how this isn't fit for purpose from their point of view. So lots to follow still, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you referenced previous pod. I'll reference last week's pod, which was quite a bit about the role of advertising within sports. Touched on a little bit with Netflix and, what their ad supportive model is. And seemingly that is more and more becoming a part of the conversation. Can't rely solely on subs. And it's not necessarily it's entirely new for them as a business, but DAZN in recent weeks has announced the launch of 10 new free ad supported streaming channels. And there's some in there that we know quite well, Matchroom Boxing, PDC Darts, which Luke Littler is still lighting up the darts world. And, I think you'll continue to see that property grow. But they've got a whole list of other things, including my favorite, which is Cornhole TV, as someone from Ohio where the great sport of cornhole was invented. And I was playing in Victoria Park the other week, getting lots of stares as I had my own board and bags with my friends. But yeah, what do you think about this from DAZN? In terms of launching, 10 new fast channels and sort of where they're going with this?
I knew you'd be a cornhole guy. Cornhole guy. Last time I went to the resort with the family, cornhole was being played all over the place. So it really, I watched some people, and they were not nearly as good as you'd see on the TV. That is for sure. But I think what's interesting about this move is it's just doubling down on what they've said is they want to be much more focused on being available through and producing more fast channel offerings, and they backed it up with this. I mean, clearly the channels they've created are very low tier, non-premium sports content, with the exception we don't know what Matchroom Boxing is going to have. I can't imagine they're going to have any of the high premium content on those channels. It's probably going to be replays of fights or maybe some magazine shows or stuff that's just being repurposed rather than being the live stuff. And they're going to push that stuff into their pay-per-view offering, which is obviously where they can generate some serious income. It makes the DAZN offering a little bit more sticky. It basically puts them into the game of trying to be another fast destination. And so if you're a big sports fan, in a similar way we're talking about the Venu Sports sort of offering, well, if you think they've got enough to offer in their fast product and you don't really know what you want to watch, you can chuck DAZN on, look up what channels they've got and just surf the channels and see if you find something you want to watch. And that's basically just making themselves a bit more of a destination between those live events. I can't say the list that they've got is necessarily driving me to make sure I'm on the platform, but it also will get adoption of DAZN for users who don't necessarily have to pay for access to that, for the premium pay for product, which I think is something they've been talking a lot about. Shai Segev, who's the CEO, has talked about they want to have 1 billion fans on the platform, right? So to do that, you're going to have a lot of consumption happening from a free perspective. And so making more and more moves around fast allows them to build more and more audiences in that space. I just don't know how they'll get audiences onto that platform. Like, how are they going to drive people to go, you know what, I need to now download the DAZN app because I'm a massive paddle fan. I need to be subscribing to the TV channel. Is it going to be discernibly better than going on to YouTube, let's say, and just consuming the various breadth of content that you've got available on that platform? So it's a nice move. I don't think it's a needle mover. And there's also other fast channels that they've launched in other markets. Like there's a women's football fast channel. And I'm not sure if they might have even launched the NFL one. But anyway, there's more to come on that. I think if you start to see some more premium names pop up, then they might have a bit more time, more interest, particularly if they're going to start having live sports available on that platform. But I'm not sure it's going to have a lot of live.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, one of the takeaways I had from the podcast last week is, I think one of the examples was volleyball, and maybe they were doing that because, Nick, they know your affinity to volleyball. I agree. Not all of those channels are on there things that I'm necessarily going to be running to, but that doesn't mean those audiences don't exist. And if there's now a way to monetize those people in a cost-efficient manner, it seems like it could work. But I agree. I don't think it's a mind-blowing move or anything over the top, but certainly something interesting.
Yeah, look, I think where I would say with this move of adding these new fast channels, support that. It creates a nice little product to market to small groups of fans. But hey, to lacrosse lovers across the world, subscribe to DAZN for free and you get access to lacrosse TV. All year, all day, all year round, access to lacrosse. Great. Where someone who's not a lacrosse fan, that might be beneficial, is if they then wrap that into more of a linear offering where you get a mix of all 10 of these different channels dispersed on a linear product as well. then that allows me the opportunity to just turn on the TV and see what they've got on. And I get a chance to get a little bit of exposure organically to lacrosse or paddle or cornhole, rather than having to actively seek, oh, I need to go to the cornhole TV channel to watch cornhole. So I think that's going to be interesting to see if they get extra value out of those rights they're sitting on and turn it into a mixed linear product on top of just the fast channel. But I think you're going to see more and more of these types of moves by anyone in the streaming space who's trying to create themselves just a bit more of a destination to come to the platform, even if it's only servicing a small group.
Yeah, well, I'm going to move our order a little bit around just because I think there's a similar type of thing taking place with one of our two remaining stories we want to talk about, and that is specifically OneFootball. We had their CEO, Patrick Fisher, on back in end of last year, and they were talking about some of the big moves they had, and obviously they've had a rebrand given he was new to his position after their longtime founder had stepped away. But they continue to keep making these moves. A little bit further back at the beginning of this year, they had the partnership with Yahoo Sports, but now they've also have doing something specifically with the MLS and with Apple and the deal they have for the MLS pass that they have there. OneFootball is continuing to take some more of that media content and put it within the platform. So, we've always been a fan of OneFootball's approach because they're not necessarily going out buying the biggest rights, but they seem to always strategically be picking up the right things in the right markets and growing the platform organically. So, Nick, specifically the MLS is the more recent news, but what do you think about some of these new things that they're bringing into the platform?
Ever since I've been following OneFootball, their approach has been, I think, really, really valuable, and just the way the industry should be really looking at how to work with each other. And what I mean by that is, you talk about an industry that's been built around licensing deals for so long. OneFootball has come and said, look, we're not going to do licensing deals. We're not going to pay you a premium to have your rights. Instead, what we can do is we can work together to provide a platform for you to generate more income and reach a bigger audience through our channels. And we share the revenue, we share the profits. Typically, that's the model. I don't know for sure if that's the play in all these deals, but given what Patrick said on this podcast before and the coverage and conversations I've had over the years, I'd expect they're still continuing to follow that model here in these partnerships. And that approach is how the sports industry has to really be transforming its way of working too. Because if they do, then that's where everyone is really on the same, playing off the same, singing off the same hymn sheet, right? They are all trying to grow each other's businesses and trying to get as many people to your platform and trying to generate as much return as possible. They've done that going back a number of years. They've done that before with various sets of live football rights right across the globe. Typically, the lower tier sort of rights that you might be things like, it might be, I don't know, I'm pulling things out of thin air, like it might be the Scottish Premier League, but available in France, or the Australian League available in Italy or whatever. So basically they'll pick up live football rights, make it available on their platforms as a sort of destination offering, and then split the revenues either through the subscription offering or a pay-per-view style approach. And they saw some really good progress with there, but it's lower risk. It was typically mopping up those rights that weren't competing really with anyone else and sharing the profits of that along the way. So if they're following that model still, and I think these moves are quite strategic, and they want to be bigger in the US, clearly, and you're talking about two or three of the biggest organizations in the US in Yahoo Sports as Yahoo is a media outlet. And actually Ryan Spoon, who's the ex-COO of SoRare, is I think the CEO or the head of Yahoo Sports these days, a really good operator. They understand the benefit of doing these types of partnerships rather than just trying to look up traditional licensing deals. And then the MLS and Apple one is an interesting one again, because it's the first deal that I've seen where we're seeing the MLS season pass be made available through a third-party provider like a OneFootball that isn't a traditional destination for them to be made available on through traditional Apple TV outlets. So I really like it. I really like what they're trying to do. I like that there's therefore a pressure on OneFootball to continue to grow its audience, both on the OneFootball platform and on social media. And when we had Patrick on the show, he was talking about they're really focused on user-generated content, so they can provide a really solid destination for some of their partners to generate their own new audiences and build up this whole this destination approach that we're seeing all the major big tech companies do, but laser focus on just football. So I really like it. I'd like to see how significant it can play a role. Obviously, OneFootball is not big in the US in comparison when you compare it to other markets. But obviously, OneFootball has been making the MLS access available for US, UK, and Germany. So I'm really interested to see how successful it is, because if it does work, it leans into almost like a de-risked way of seeing what DAZN have done with the NFL, I suppose. And like, hey, they've taken the NFL Game Pass into their platform, but have had to pay a huge or commit a huge amount as a minimum guarantee to achieve that. This is a way that everyone wins, and it's fairly low risk for all parties involved, right? So I really hope it works for everyone, and it could give OneFootball at the edge on having more of those deals and conversations with other major sports properties in the world.
Yeah, well, like I said, just anecdotally, I didn't plan on coming here and just promoting Sorare the whole time, but OneFootball is great for me because, we talk about fragmentation, how difficult it can be to find news. OneFootball, for me, someone that's got players across the world in some of the most random leagues, OneFootball is the one place I can always go, and, you can get injury updates or starting lineup predictions, the kind of stuff that, quite frankly, Nick, I can't find anywhere else. So, for anyone that's a football fan, genuinely, just free shout out, free promo to OneFootball. It is genuinely, I've got the Premier League app, I've got the ESPN app, but in terms of football coverage, they really do a great job. And I think some of that stuff, bringing in some of the content that someone like a Yahoo Sports makes, is great. It keeps me on the platform for more than just checking scores. It gives me other different things like that, because not all the teams and players that I have are getting streamed because they're, Belgium second league. So if I want coverage and scouting information, that's where I got to go, is OneFootball. So it really is a very valuable platform, anecdotally speaking, for myself.
Yeah, the Yahoo Sports is a really interesting one. It's my guess and my take would be it's a bit of a strategic move. That's a bit of a win-win for all parties. So Yahoo Sports is probably a bit weaker on soccer coverage on their platform, so they wanted to increase that. OneFootball is really solid on that, but they aren't big yet in the US, so they needed a way of creating awareness and visibility for the OneFootball brand. So my guess is this allows them to create awareness of OneFootball as a destination, as a product, as a platform, allow Yahoo to increase its content availability on the platform itself around soccer, particularly in the build up to the World Cup. And that's basically the crux of the deal. There isn't probably going to be a lot of necessarily money exchanging hands as much as just there's an awareness play for OneFootball, driving new audiences to their platforms where applicable, and Yahoo gets a bevy of new content that they can make available to make their website more sticky to a newer set of fans who might be more and more interested in soccer than what they're traditionally known for is the more traditional top 5 leagues of the NBA, NHL, baseball, and the like.
Yeah, so we'll go a little quick fire on these last two, but one of them is bringing us into the social media world, and it's TikTok. And specifically, we want to talk about they're now testing doing videos up to 60 minutes long. Now, it's a bit limited as to who gets it, and we're not saying that's directly going to be linked to sports or some future sports strategy, but it is definitely a change for TikTok. And I would say it's interesting because I think one of the arguments that we've heard is Gen Z and Gen Alpha have short attention spans. They're only interested in, small things. And the argument would be TikTok, because you can just flip up and you get the next video. Well, now you have TikTok themselves saying they're looking at doing videos up to potentially 60 minutes long. So I just find that dynamic quite interesting, that TikTok has been blamed for the rise in ADHD and children being overstimulated, but they're actually talking about potentially doing 60-minute videos, which seems to, kind of laugh at that. So it's an interesting story. Don't know if it'll ever impact sports, but, it could. But just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so I won't go into whether or not it is impacting ADHD, but I will say that all the other platforms that exist in the market now are basically ripping off each other. So TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all of them with their shorts and stories and alike are all basically replicating each other in this instance. And even things like X and Facebook, if you start consuming their videos, you go into a swiping video scenario where you can just scroll to the next video. So everyone's replicating that TikTok approach. So it's kind of only natural, I think, that for TikTok to grow, they have to change. They have to offer something new, and they've been testing different things like this for some time. 10 minutes was a revelation when they brought that to the table, and they have been dipping their toe into live sports quite a bit. One of the the broadcast I saw that was really impressive was, I am having a mind blank of which sport it was, but I'll describe what I saw, which was, I think, the most interesting is when we've seen live sports broadcast, typically it's been in the vertical format, typically single player. The highlights for things like the NBA's worked really well on there, but it's in the vertical format, right? So what they were doing, I think I'm going to say it was cricket, perhaps, but might not have been. Is they had basically two kind of 16:9 feeds on top of each other. And so what that allowed is you get just that dual screen experience. So at the bottom you could have the live stats, the live data for the match happening, and at the top you have the call broadcast. And either one could switch throughout. It could be that, we want to have two simultaneous angles on that one moment. It could be that there's an interview happening. You want some overlay of data that can sit underneath. So you could obviously get way more crafty with what that experience was to consume in a format or in a framing that actually works much, much better to watch it. If you think about, if you've watched a typical broadcast feed 16:9, and they might have, let's say, the NFL off to the side and some stats, or the advertisement on the left, it's a bit clunky. Versus if you go to a vertical format on the phone, it does look, and aesthetically, it's much more of a better experience. So my point here is that I think now that they've been testing sports, and that's to try and test longer engagement time in a vertical format for a while now, I think that's starting to bear some fruit for them. So I think it makes only sense that they try and expand this, and I do think you're going to see more longer form content available on TikTok. I think it's interesting if you think about, I don't know if you remember the platform that came as quickly as it went, was Quibi. Was it Quibi?
Was that the Walmart owned?
I don't know if it was Walmart owned, but it was basically a vertical only platform that raised hundreds and hundreds of millions, and then just fell flat instantly, and they had to shut it down as quickly as they made it. And I guess my point there is, I think they were onto something in the concept of trying to create longer form content for that platform. They raised $1.75 billion for that, and they shut it down within less than 12 months, probably 6 months. But my point is, I think this sort of opened up the floodgates. Hey, users, you can create content to go onto the platform. That's just a much smarter way to make video content in longer form work than, hey, we're going to launch a network of original content in vertical formats. So I think it's just one for, again, another one for us to watch to see if you see the engagement going up and people producing more and more dedicated content to TikTok for longer form.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last one, it's a bit of bonus content. It's selfishly for myself, being an American, loving college football and all forms of football, actually. It's a first step, but TNT, and we're not talking to, Warner Brothers, TNT, with Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley, that TNT. We're talking about the UK TNT, now has rights to the college football playoffs. So not getting the full season yet. It's a dip in the water, but as you know, Nick, we've talked about this before, why college football is not on TV in the UK, I don't understand. For as much money as interest as the NFL has, it just seems like an obvious move. It can't even be that expensive, but at least someone is finally dipping their toe in this water.
Well, I know you and I have talked a number of times about how much it grinds our gears that not only is US sports not available in the UK the way it should be, but ESPN, things like ESPN Plus, ESPN has a lot of those rights. They could have just wrapped it into the Plus product. Instead, when you try and sign up to ESPN Plus, you only get access really to the editorial stuff and nothing to do with the live sports broadcasting experience available on ESPN Plus. And I just felt like that was such an easy way of bringing that all to life. So glad to see they're finally doing it. It just shows, though, right, if the size and scale of the US is so significant that it almost feels like ESPN and those types of broadcasts, like, you know what, this doesn't move the needle for us. We're talking a few million extra dollars to the bottom line here. That's not enough to move the needle. We're not going to bother. We've got other priorities to work around. That's what it feels like. So good to see that this is finally being done. And I really just expect that the US sports will be made more readily available. Now with Sky's new Sky Sports Plus product and platform, it will be interesting to see if we do see more of that pop up on the platform. But again, I don't think you're going to see Sky Sports spending a lot of money on those rights. So time will tell. But good to see finally those US sports crazy fans like yourself will finally get access to some good college sports, which I have started watching a little bit more of lately. I have to say it's more entertaining than I expected.
Well, I'm just glad, Nick, because I would never want to engage in illegal behavior, illegal activity to access sporting content. So I'm very grateful that I can watch it legally and don't have to, even consider doing something like that.
I'm sure you are, and you're obviously very above board. I am very happy that part of my Revolut account that I get free access to a free VPN now. So at least I have the option to be more flexible in what I'm broadcasting, but all within the right means, of course.
Well, Nick, it was great to be back. Everyone else, thank you for welcoming me back, and we will catch you on the next episode of StreamTime Sports.
Thanks, everyone. Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.